Take a look at headlines right now and you might see rent control debates sweeping the nation. The states of California, New York, and Oregon, all of them are rent-controlled states. And then you have local jurisdictions inside of New Jersey, Maryland, and Maine, and even in my home state of Minnesota. In today's video, we're gonna talk about what rent control is, the history of the implementation of rent control, and how, if passed, is going to make me a very rich investor. Hey guys, it's me, BP, Ben Peters, coming at you with another video. I am a real estate agent and real estate investor in the state of Minnesota. I own 20 rental units, all long-term or short-term. And if you like videos like this, if you like learning about stuff like this, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this video with other people like this. I know it sounds silly, but when you guys subscribe and share these videos, it's what's making this channel grow. And now let's jump into the video. First of all, what is rent control? Rent control is when a government entity decides we are going to cap the amount a landlord can increase rent. Typically, this is on a yearly basis. What rent control was designed to do was to step in certain areas that had very low supply and very high demand, and make sure that landlords weren't being greedy and that they weren't putting ridiculous prices on rent. Now, specifically, let's look at rent control. I live in Minnesota, and St. Paul, Minnesota instituted rent control back in 2022. So let's see what that looks like. Here is the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. The Rent Stabilization Ordinance aims to address a shortage of affordable residential rental housing in the city of St. Paul. The ordinance limits residential rent increases to no more than 3% in a 12-month period. However, there are exceptions. Here are a couple of the exceptions. Standard allowable increase, 3%. Self-certification increase exception, 3 to 8%. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but lastly, just cause vacancy, CPI. So if CPI is 4% plus 8%, you could potentially raise it up to 12%. And then staff determined increase exemption, no limit with appropriate justification. Oh, and the last thing I want to point out, the ordinance also directs the city to create a process for landlords to request an exception to the 3% limit based on the right to a reasonable return on investment. So this is one of the harshest rent controls that have been implemented in the United States. One of my favorite words right there was a reasonable return on investment. So if you want to raise it more than 3% per year, you have to go before a board and say, hey, here's my justification of why I think I should get a reasonable return on investment. Spoiler alert, I don't want to go to a board and say why I think I should get a reasonable return on investment. What is reasonable? Is it 1%? Is it 10%? Is it 15%? I don't want to do that before a board. I don't want my real estate investing to have to go to a board to get a return on investment. Now, here's a little bit more about this history. This was back in 2022 when St. Paul implemented this rent control. Minneapolis was debating implementing this rent control in 2022 as well. They just said, you know what? Since St. Paul is implementing it, let's sit back and see how it goes. And I'll show you how it went. This is from the Twin Cities, the Pioneer Press, okay? I like to point this out. What did rent control do with the city of St. Paul? When it comes to construction of duplexes, triplexes, and other forms of multifamily housing, St. Paul building permits plummeted by 48% last year compared to the year before. This was written in 2023, the year after implementing rent control. And so they implement rent control. What immediately happens? Duplexes, triplexes, and multifamily housing permits go down by 50%. Actions have consequences. And lastly, overall, new multifamily housing construction was more than 3 times busier in Minneapolis than its sister city, with 3,600 units permitted, compared to 1,000 units permitted. This is what we saw in the state of Minnesota when it came to rent control. St. Paul institutes rent control, and immediately housing falls off a cliff, and all those developers who were gonna invest in St. Paul decide, I'm gonna go to Minneapolis, where they won't cap my rent. As the city officials in St. Paul saw that all these permits were going over to Minneapolis, they thought, ooh, hey, maybe we didn't do the right thing. So what they did is they went back to these developers and said, hey, if you're a brand new developer, we're gonna exempt you from rent control. So what did that do? It screwed over all the mom and pop landlords. Majority of people, I believe the statistic is around 80% of landlords are mom and pop landlords who own 1 and 2 properties. And so what did St. Paul do? They said, hey, brand new developers, hey, we aren't going to give you rent control, but oh, hey, grandma and grandpa down the street who are living off of the rent from their duplex just down the road, we're going to cap you. And why do I know this? I have helped many of my investor clients start selling properties in the city of St. Paul. Now you might be saying, Ben, you said in the beginning of this video, rent control is going to make you rich. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like the data is pointing to that. Let me show you how I think rent control is going to make me rich. I'm going to show you one of my rentals in South Minneapolis, how supply and demand can really, really affect rental prices unless you implement rent control. So here's one of my rentals. Right now it's not available for lease, but 3615 Elliott Avenue. As you can tell, pictures are pretty solid. You know, hey, we did a little bit of renovations in this unit. We have since repainted. This is the blue paint, what it used to be. The green, yeah, the colors were terrible when I originally bought this, but we've done some renovations since. Now, when I rented this out originally, it was a nice unit. Again, we had done some renovations since those pictures. And when I rented it out, I signed a lease for $1,550. This was 2 years ago, right in the middle of rent control when St. Paul passed it, Minneapolis didn't. This rental is located in Minneapolis. So this tenant, it has been sitting there, it has been renting from me for the past 2 years. Now their lease has come up for renewal. My property manager asked me, hey, what do you want to renew them at? What rate do you want to renew them at? And I said, hey, let's look at the comparables. And I use Rentometer to price out my rentals. Look at this. So I signed a lease 2 years ago for $1,550. The average 2-bed, 1-bath rent in that area, $1,446. $1,446. And so what that shows me is that a bunch of new units came online, and because of that, rents have went down. So I'm giving them the option, hey, you can renew at your current lease rate of $1,550, or if you want to go elsewhere, you can go elsewhere. They elected to renew their rent at that same price, and they're super excited. They're absolutely excited because they're like, oh, my landlord didn't raise rent on me. Now let's talk about if rent control was instituted in Minneapolis. Because I can only raise it by 3% per year, every landlord is guaranteed to raise rent by 3% per year, because if you don't raise that rent by 3%, year 1, year 2, year 3, you really start lagging behind. And because you can only raise it by 3% per year, every landlord on the face of the planet will raise it every year that they are able to. Now let's talk about if this building was under rent control. The market becomes irrelevant under rent control because as landlords, we can only increase 3% per year. So we're going to increase 3% per year no matter what. Even if there's a bunch of new inventory on the market, we're going to increase that 3% because there might be a year where rent should go up by 10%. Well, we can only raise it by 3%, so we're going to continue only raising it by 3%. Now, I want to show you that if Minnesota says, all right, rent control across the board, this is why I'm going to become a very rich man. All right, right now in my rental portfolio, if everybody pays, I make $31,500 in rent every single month. Now, sometimes people don't pay, sometimes they're late, but that's a pretty average. Let's just say Minnesota institutes, hey, rent control across the board, 3% every year, no matter what. Well, I'm going to increase 3% no matter what on every single one of my rentals. So 3% this year, 3% this year, and it just keeps, eventually you start getting to compounding interest. And by 10 years down the road, I haven't even bought another property and I'm making $41,100 per month. And so for me, if rent control is implemented, I'm going to be making a lot more money because I no longer have to worry about the market. What just happened with my property at Elliott Avenue, that's never going to happen. I'm never going to look at rents and say, oh, you know what? I'm not raising you this year. I'm going to raise 3% every year, no matter what. Now, you might be saying, Ben, what can I do with this information? Is this good? Is this bad? Well, let me tell you. Hopefully, this video shows you that no matter what happens, there's upside in real estate. If rent control is passed in the state of Minnesota, I'm going to make a ton of money. If it's not passed, and we have to work with supply and demand economics, I'm probably going to make a bunch of money. Will rent control add some hoops for you to jump through? Absolutely, 100%. But there's opportunity in every market. So whether rent control is implemented or not, you can make some great money investing in real estate. And hopefully I showed you that rent control is just a terrible idea in general. But I want to hear from you. Put it down in the comments. Tell me, do you like rent control? Do you like the idea behind it? Do you like it in practice? Hey, maybe it's a great idea. Maybe it's a terrible idea. Let me know. I'll respond to every single one of the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.